Welcome back to 25 Proofs of God. We've gone through some, and we still have to go through some more. Okay, let's go.
NDEs, near-death experiences. The Lancet Medical Magazine out of England has reported thousands of cases of people who were clinically dead, and yet their life went on.
I can't believe their heart stopped and then also started again.
There were certain features that were common to all of them, such as a great light, a tunnel, and a life review.
I severely doubt these were common to all of them. These are things which are common. That doesn't mean they're common to everyone, but so seeing white, a tunnel, so tunnel vision, and a life review, so dreaming about things you remember because you know at some level that you're dying. Wow. Maybe I seem like I'm being a little bit dismissive. I kind of am. I mean, I've talked about NDEs a little bit before, and frankly, as much as I really care to, because the whole thing is basically, here's some funny shit your brain does when it's in severe medical distress. Okay, smile and nod. Really neat. Cool. I'll file that away in my mental filing cabinet and never pull it out again.
The commonality knocks out the possibility that these were just hallucinations, which would all be totally different.
No, they really wouldn't. I mean, for one thing, you're talking about very simple experiences. Seeing white, having tunnel vision, that's not some complex scene. And then remembering things in your own life, well, that's not the same between people. So that doesn't even fit with what you just said. I am curious how you interpret all the Christians who say they saw Jesus. What do you think about that? That's common between lots of people, at least in their claims. I notice you didn't mention that, though. But let's say there were hallucinations. Hallucinations are not as different between people as you think they are. There are certain things in hallucinations which are often common between lots of different people. If you want to know more about that, go read something like Oliver Sacks's Hallucinations. It's a real quick and easy read, and I think it's worth it because it's really enlightening just how many people experience hallucinations, totally sane, normal people, and how much overlap there is between the nature of those different people's hallucinations, especially people with similar issues in their brain. And I don't think anybody would argue that what they're seeing is actually real. You know, people aren't seeing actual cartoon characters running around in front of their eyes. They're not actually seeing people with outsized, deformed facial features. But these things and more are common between lots of people. So I would not say that the white vision and the tunnel vision in near-death experiences is a hallucination in the same sense. But even if it were, even if the hallucinations were more complex, I still would not discount them as hallucinations. I'd be thinking more along the lines of, so what's common between what happened to these different people, to their brains?
Doesn't this prove that we are more than just a body?
No, it doesn't even begin to prove that.
Doesn't this prove that we have a soul?
No, it doesn't prove it or even suggest it.
And wouldn't a soul need to be created by God?
No, actually, I don't see why it would. I mean, we're talking about something supernatural here, something beyond nature, beyond the universe, right? Why couldn't these souls just be eternally existing things, just like God? And why couldn't they be that just in the absence of God? I mean, if God just exists, why can't souls just exist? It's the same fucking thing, just my thing exists for no reason because I said so. So yeah, I don't really see the connection.
Number 16. We are more than just our body. We are consciousness. We have a soul.
Isn't that what you just said? But now it's a new item?
If you cut off my arm, I am still Shmuel.
Yeah, I mean, before you were two-armed Shmuel, and now you're one-armed Shmuel, but other than that, yeah.
Not less of a Shmuel, the exact same Shmuel that I was.
No, you'd be several pounds less of Shmuel, much like I am several pounds more of Logicked than I was when I started my channel. Look, I get what you're trying to say, right? You're not psychologically diminished in whatever arbitrary way you're choosing to talk about. You might actually, though, be very psychologically changed by losing your arm, just to be clear. But I think that misses the greater point, which is, why did you choose the arm for this? Why didn't you choose the brain? If you lose your arm, you're not psychologically less like Shmuel? Okay. Let's talk about what happens if you lose your head. Or actually, we don't have to go that extreme. Let's talk about what happens if somebody takes an ice pick and jams it up through your eye socket and gives you a frontal lobotomy. Or if you want to stick with the arm, what if instead of removing the arm, someone sticks a needle in it full of heroin every single day, 5 times a day? Your personality, your psychology is just going to be fine, intact, unchanged through these changes to your body? Really? Well, no, in all of these scenarios and many other possible scenarios, you're going to be a radically changed person, purely through physical changes to your body.
So Shmuel is beyond the body. That's what we call a soul.
No, he isn't. That's what we call a brain.
Number 17. fine-tuning. The fine-tuning argument says...
The fine-tuning argument says the same damn thing you've said a whole bunch of different times now, which is, how is this like it is? I don't like science's answers, or maybe they don't have one yet. Therefore, the thing I made up is right. It's getting a little old how you keep making the same argument over and over and over. I mean, sure, you change the words, but the point is the same, which is God done it because I said so.
The present universe, including the laws that govern it, and the initial conditions from which it has evolved, permits life only because these laws and conditions take a very special form. Small, tiny changes would make life impossible.
Well, I guess we wouldn't be here having this argument then, would we? That sounds more and more appealing as we go on. What number is this? 17? Ugh.
Even Stephen Hawking had to admit...
Sorry, Stephen who?
Stephen Hawking.
Oh, Stephen Hawking's. He's that skateboarder, right? Oh, no, right. That's Tony Hawking's.
Even Stephen Hawking had to admit that the size of the electric charge of the electron and the ratio of the masses of the proton and the electron, the remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. Well, I wonder who adjusted it that way.
I've read A Brief History of Time. I know what happens after the quote mine. Like, do you think he just stopped there, similar to the Darwin quote mine about the eye? People just assume he stopped after he said the evolution of the eye seems absurd. And meanwhile, obviously, he used that as a jumping off point to talk about how it actually happened. And of course, that's what happens in A Brief History of Time. Now, does Hawking reach some solid conclusion? Does he give you the answer to life, the universe, and everything? No. For one thing, the book was written in 1988. Let's maybe read something a little bit fresher. But for another thing, there's no perfectly solidly established answer now. And with that, we return to the point I keep returning to throughout this video, which is stop discounting all future discovery and just slapping your own ideas onto it. Give it time. Don't be dumb. Otherwise, 100 years from now, members of your religion are going to have to swallow their pride and accept that they were wrong to deny the possibility of any future scientific discovery that whole time, and accept whatever the new big thing is then. Don't shoot your religion in the foot preemptively. Oh, and I have to say, too, there's one thing that bothers me beyond just the denial of the possibility of learning and discovery about things that we don't quite know for sure yet, and that is the implicit insistence that we shouldn't want to learn or discover. That the correct thing to do when you encounter an actually interesting scientific question is to just immediately give up because you don't know the answer already, and just believe whatever. The total contempt for the entire concept of learning is fucking disgraceful.
I wonder who fine-tuned it. Did your piano tune itself, or was it tuned purposefully by someone?
A guy tuned my piano, so let me tell you how much I know about the universe.
The strong nuclear force, if it were 2% stronger than it is, while the other constants were left unchanged, diprotons would be stable.
Can you please explain to me what a diproton is? Well, no, you can't, because, I mean, I can tell you're reading off something. Specifically, the Wikipedia page for fine-tuned universe. You couldn't even do another fine-tuning argument yourself. You had to go to Wikipedia and read straight off the site. He does that a lot in this video. I don't point most of it out, but some of it I do.
Yeah, jag bara just googlade vad det är and there I go.
Yeah. Well, if it sounds too... It's the same with Armando.
Yeah,
if it sounds smart and he sounds awkward saying it, you know it's... Yeah.
According to physicist Paul Davies, hydrogen would fuse into them instead of deuterium and helium. This would drastically alter the physics of stars and presumably, basically, would preclude the existence of life similar to what we observe on Earth.
Yeah, you just read like half a paragraph verbatim. Makes me wonder how much of that you've been doing up to this point. I'm sure there's a lot to discover.
So he's saying if these constants are wrong, even by a little bit, we all die.
No, he's saying you would not have existed. That's what the pre part of preclude means. See, this is what happens when instead of arguing for yourself, you just read stuff you don't understand.
That's basically what he's saying.
No, that's definitely not what he's saying. Basically or otherwise.
Could a bomb be diffused by evolution, even if you gave it billions of years?
Can I point out we're still on number 17 here? How many different arguments have we had just in number 17? You probably could have made these into individual points, but unfortunately you filled up your 25 with duplicates.
Could a bomb be diffused by a big bang that happened billions of years ago?
Hey, if the bomb went bang, I'm sure it wouldn't have a fuse anymore.
If you believe the bomb is diffused intentionally...
Hold on, what bomb are we talking about? The bomb of fine-tuning that makes us all come into existence and then die? He says that if the physical constants were different,
Yeah.
that human beings would all be killed. Like, if the physical constants had been different at the start of the Big Bang, humans now would be killed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it comes from the past into the present, waits until now, and then just poof.
Yeah, poof, yeah. It's kind of like that movie Looper,
Yeah.
where somebody will, like, get injured in the past,
Yeah.
and then the version of them, like, 30 years later in the future, who's, like, just doing something,
Yeah.
will all of a sudden get an injury. Like, they'll be driving along, and all of a sudden their hand will be missing or something.
Great.
It's not like they had the hand missing for 30 years. It waits 30 years and then injures them.
Why don't you believe that the physical constants were created intentionally when getting those wrong could not just blow up a building, but blow up the entire human race?
Shit, dude, that sounds like a great premise for a movie. CERN has 1 month to figure out how to fix all the physical constants so the fine-tuning doesn't blow up and kill the entire human race. By the way, just to be clear, why are we assuming these constants could be different? Why are we assuming that the origin of the universe was not such that it necessitated them to be the way they are? That physical reality demands it? Why are we discounting this as a possibility? And then, of course, even if we accept that premise, which seems like jumping the gun, why are we just discounting every other physical possibility, multiverses and so on? It just seems incredibly premature, just denying we'll ever have any kind of a satisfactory answer, and so you just jam your thing in there. But we've talked about that.
Number 18, how do we really know what is good?
Oh, is this going to be the argument that you don't like it because you're afraid of there being no objective morality from God? And so therefore it can't be true, and so therefore there's God?
How do you really know not to kill?
You know what? You got a point there, bud. If there's no God dictating what I should do, then there's literally no reason not to just kill everyone. Cool, this is a life-changing realization. Thanks for talking me into it.
If you grew up in Nazi Germany, you would believe it's fine to kill.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? You know, despite there being supposedly objective morality, defined by God and imposed on everyone, which the Nazis in general believed in because the vast majority of Germany at the time was Christian, the Nazis still did the thing. Didn't seem to work all that good. It's almost like it might be helpful to maybe have like other reasons too, and not just rely on myths to keep people off each other's throats.
And we could say that about many other civilizations throughout history.
Yeah, I know. Even the utilitarian argument, the little people argument, the keeping people under control argument for religion doesn't really hold water, judging by human history. By the way, I looked up if the little people morality argument is a term that other people use. You know, obviously I'm referring to arrogant aristocrats saying, of course we think religion's bullshit, but, the little people, it's valuable for them to believe it. We should ensure that they remain believers, because they need a reason to, suppress their base instincts. And the first thing that came up was an article on the ethics of dwarf tossing. Just not what I expected.
But how do we really know? Why does it bother us so much in the pit of our stomach if an innocent person is killed?
Who's us? The Nazis were people, didn't bother them. The other civilizations you're talking about were people, didn't bother them. So again, who's us? It's not humanity. Humans are capable of losing their empathy, they're capable of becoming psychopaths, they're capable of ignoring morality completely, of not caring about other people. That's part of the human condition. It's not separate from it, it's part of it. And the way you phrased the question initially is kind of revealing. If you grew up in Nazi Germany, you would think that killing people was fine. Right, because the way you're raised has an enormous amount to do with how you feel about morality, what you think is right, what you think is wrong. And that certainly does not just go for major life or death questions, that goes for very small things. There are things that seem from the outside absolutely petty that if people do it, they feel deep, deep shame about. Immense guilt. And I think this happens probably in most societies where there's these taboos or expectations where if you violate them, it's considered very socially bad. But other societies won't care whatsoever. I mean, for example, I remember in high school, at some point I got like a C+ on a math test, and it felt like a massive moral failing. To this day, I still have a problem with that, the things that I failed in that way on in my life, where I look back and I don't just think, oh, it would have been beneficial to me to do better on that, but I actually feel like it reflects something wrong about me as a person. And it's the same thing with being, self-reliant, independent, responsible, a good parent, things like this. Because of my upbringing, these don't feel like things that are just a good idea to do. I don't just see the utility in them. To violate them feels like an actual moral failing. It feels similar to if I were to steal something from a store or kick an old lady across the street. What, I have a good kick. And the funny thing is, despite being a lifelong atheist, with certainly non-religious parents, I still feel like it's an obligation to pass those kind of things on to my daughter. Not because some almighty being demanded that I do so, but just because that's part of what I am naturally as a human. I pass on my values to the next generation. Now, could my values have been twisted? Could I have been raised in that way and ended up a completely different way? Absolutely. I'm as far from immune to that as all those people who fell for Nazi ideology. And that's the reason for vigilance. It's the reason to understand the weaknesses of your own mind, the ways you can be manipulated. It's the reason to think critically about what people tell you, and just to take responsibility for your own mind and keep it clear of undue influence from others.
Pharaoh from Egypt threw all Jewish babies, male babies, into the Nile River. It was the Bible that set down the law of the 10 Commandments and do not murder.
I would be very surprised if the 10 Commandments are the first time anyone ever came up with the idea of not killing other people. That seems like an instinct that would be fairly well ingrained into a species like us. Either way, I have to say, the way that's been applied throughout history, I'm kind of surprised there's not a bunch of little superscript footnote numbers after it. Thou shalt not kill, except in this case, and that case, and that case, and half the time over here. I mean, your example was Nazi Germany. That was a by far majority Christian country. Yay, 10 Commandments.
And the Bible is the only thing that cannot be corrupted by tyrants.
I feel like with a little bit of effort and luck, the Bible certainly can be corrupted. Doesn't even have to be intentional. Think of all the people who read the King James Bible and think that very flawed English translation is the only perfect, 100% literally accurate final version of God's word.
And the Bible says that the Bible is a revelation from God.
Oh, the Bible says the Bible's true. There's not a lot of people who make that argument quite that openly nowadays. So I guess thanks for just being straightforward about it.
Number 19, how the ball of the Big Bang got there. What was there before the raw materials of the Big Bang?
Was there a before? I mean, you were talking about Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time before. In the chapter that you quoted from, he goes on to talk about imaginary time where there is no before. Maybe you think he was right about some other stuff, too. Who am I kidding? You never read it. Okay, so I guess there was a before. So what was before the Big Bang? Something?
If you say something, then that's not the raw materials before the Big Bang.
Well, you're saying there was something there, and you're asking me what the something was, so I think something's a perfectly fine answer. Why are you setting up a scenario where there have to be raw materials, and then insisting the materials can't be something? You're defining a narrow range of acceptable answers to you, and then insisting that I'm not allowed to give you an answer that fits into that range.
If you say nothing, we can laugh you out of class because you're saying that nothing created something. And we all know that nothing only creates nothing.
Before you said God made the universe out of nothing. In point number something. I don't know. 1 maybe? But anyway, therefore, clearly it's possible. But now you're saying it's laughable. Well, which is it? Stuff can just exist for no reason. We've established that with God. Something can literally come from nothing. We've established that with God, or the creation of the universe by God. And now you declare that impossible. There could not have been something before the Big Bang that just existed, and there could not have been nothing before the Big Bang because nothing comes from nothing. Okay, so your religion's wrong on both counts then.
So the only other choice is that there was something that created the raw materials of the Big Bang, but that something did not need a creator.
Look, obviously I agree with you that it's a valid answer to say maybe there was something that did not need a creator, which is why I see no reason to posit God. You don't need this extra step. You could just say there was something and from that came the universe. But your thing is there was something and that something made something else and from that something else came the universe. It just seems redundant.
It did not need anything preceding it. Now, you might say that's a double standard. If the raw materials had to have a creator, God must have had to have a creator as well. But that's wrong, because the God we're talking about is beyond the laws of the universe. He created the laws of the universe, and therefore He needs no creator, as would be true within the universe. Within the universe, there needs to always be something preceding something, but not outside of it.
Okay, so the something that existed before the universe, which was not God, just the raw material something, did not need a creator because there's no cause and effect, there's no need to posit anything causing it, and it needed no cause to create the universe because there's no cause and effect, it's outside the universe. There, done. Problem solved, without a God, by your own rules, there you go.
Number 20. Our bodies are well-built machines. Our bodies are more well-built than the smartest computer.
Okay, I'm really hoping you expand on that because I don't know what that means. Well-built is not really a term with much firmly defined technical meaning. It's just basically a way to say I think that was done real good like.
And they last a lot longer. Doesn't that mean the creator of the body is smarter than the smartest computer programmers? I think it does.
No, sir, I refuse your assessment. I am not a robot. I am a real biological organism with dignity.
21. Bible codes. Scientists are laughing at me now
Don't worry, they've been laughing at you for a long time.
because they like to think that they have debunked Bible codes as a proof that God exists.
So this is going to be some kind of numerology kind of stuff? You know, personally, I think the real problem is nothing to do with whether it's been debunked or not. I think the bigger issue is this kind of stuff is done to support all kinds of different religions, all kinds of different beliefs, and it works for all of them. Contradictory claims from all kinds of contradictory belief systems. And the reason, of course, is that if you sift through enough stuff looking for patterns and you're willing to fudge them enough, if you go on a motivated search for stuff to support your idea, you're probably going to find it, especially if you have enough source material. It's just pattern seeking with a pre-planned outcome. It's pretty much doomed to end in self-delusion.
But they are almost all, ignorant of the Talmud, which points out many legitimate things that foretell historical events in ways that cannot be random.
Yeah, that's what they all say about everything.
One interesting code is in the book of Esther. After the Jews defend themselves and killed 10 sons of Haman, Esther asked the king, "If it pleases the king, let it be granted to the Jews to do tomorrow also as this day, and have the bodies of Haman's 10 sons hanged in public display on the gallows." Esther's request seems somewhat strange. The 10 sons of Haman had already been killed. Why did Esther request the king to hang them again? The simple approach suggests that she made this request so that everyone would know the consequences that would befall them, just in case anyone else might think of harming the Jews.
Okay, well, that sounds like an incredibly reasonable explanation. It is a bit of a strange story until you think about it through that lens, and then, yeah, it kind of makes sense. That seems like exactly what a lot of people have done throughout history. Display the bodies of the enemy or parts of them to deter other people. So, job done, I guess. Brush the hands off and move forward, eh?
However, rabbinic commentaries offer a different spin on the events
Just what we need, more spin.
that inspire the holiday of Purim. Commenting on the word tomorrow in Esther's request, the Midrash, Tanhuma Bo 13.
Okay, this is really annoying to listen to because you're just awkwardly reading something that you appear not to have read before fully, which is just going to go uncredited because we're supposed to take these as your words, which they're not. Oh, here we go. I found it. mycentraljersey.com. That's what he's ripping off here. Unless they're ripping off someone else, who knows?
Comments, there is a tomorrow that is now and a tomorrow that is later, indicating a prophecy for the future.
Yeah, so assumption number one, tomorrow doesn't mean tomorrow, it means sometime in the future. But sometimes it means tomorrow, because there is a tomorrow that's tomorrow, but there's also a tomorrow that's not tomorrow, it's some other day, within the next indefinite amount of time. Actually, that was not assumption number one. Assumption number one was Esther didn't really mean just like hang the guys up to deter other people from attacking us. She meant something else, because that'll be useful for our prophecy claims.
Esther unconsciously prophesies a time when the Jewish people would reenact the hanging of Haman's 10 sons.
Well, that's an awful fucking stretch. I mean, wasn't she just asking the king there to hang him? I think you're reading an awful lot into this already.
And now, as radio star Paul Harvey used to say, you're going to hear the rest of the story.
Oh my god, you even read like their flavor text out loud? At least skip that part. At least skip their weird, lame jokes or whatever that's supposed to be.
After World War II, the surviving Nazi leaders were tried at Nuremberg for their war crimes. On October 1st, 1946, 12 of the German defendants were sentenced to death by hanging for their part in the atrocities committed against the Jews and others. One of those convicted was Martin Bormann, who was sentenced in absentia. A second was Hermann Göring, who committed suicide in his cell just hours before the executions. The remaining 10 Germans were hanged on October 16th, 1946.
Okay, I know it's really tedious to listen to all this awkward reading, but yeah, there's the point. 12 Nazi leaders were sentenced to death by hanging in the Nuremberg trials. One of them in absentia, one of them killed himself before the hanging, and the other 10 were actually hanged, and it happened on October whatever, 1946.
The date is significant, as you will see. In listing the names of the 10 sons of Haman, Jewish tradition always has required that the 3 letters in the name of Haman's sons be written in a smaller font, a Tuf, a Shin, and a Zayin, which has the gematria, i.e. the numerical equivalent of 707, because Shin is 300, Tuf is 400, and Zayin is 7.
Okay, so we're deciding that the intended thing to do with these smaller letters is to take their values in the gematria and add those all together to make 707. We don't multiply them, we don't divide them, we don't subtract them, we don't raise them to the power of each other, we don't take them as 3 separate numbers with 3 separate meanings. There's a bunch of different things we could think to do with them, but arbitrarily we choose that we're going to add them together. And just to be clear, in the Hebrew Bible there are quite a few places where letters are traditionally written smaller, but we're not taking these as a set of those as part of some larger message. No, these are a self-contained message, because these are the ones that appear in the list of Haman's sons, and therefore arbitrarily we decide that puts them in a separate category. Do you see what I mean about motivated pattern seeking? Anyway, go on.
It was not known why we needed to write these 3 letters in a smaller font for millennium, but now we know. When in Hebrew we speak of the calendar year, we do not use the 1,000 number. This year, for example, is 5,778 in Hebrew, or whatever it was at the time, with the writing of 5,773 at the writing of this article. In Hebrew, is called Shin Tuf Ayin Gimel, or 773. It is assumed that everyone knows what millennium they are in. So based on the word tomorrow in Esther's request as clearly being some future event, these smaller 3 letters were a future prophecy for the killing of Haman's 10 sons in a future year 707.
Well, I'll make it seem even better than the article did. I looked into this argument, and it turns out that when it was put forth in the book The Code of Esther, the authors also brought up that there's a larger vav, I don't know how to pronounce these letter names, sorry, but a larger letter also in the list of names. Here I've pointed out all the smaller letters and the larger letter. So the vav has a gematria value of 6, which seems useless, but if we add it to the other ones, well, that makes 713, but it's bigger, and so we multiply it by 1,000. Not 10 or 100 or anything else that we could multiply it by, but no, 1,000. Because the My Central Jersey article that you were reading off had to do kind of a cop-out and say, oh, well, we don't really say the millennium. So it's just 707. It could be 4707, 5707. But no, we have the millennium. So now we have 6707. Wait a second. October 1946, though, was 5707. That doesn't work. Okay, you know what? We're not going to add that to the 707, even though that would make a whole lot of sense, because that would be 5,707 years since the creation of the world, which would line up with the calendar. No, we're going to say that the 6 means we're in the 6th millennium since the creation of the world. So there's no addition going on anymore. Now we're taking the 6 to mean the millennium that we're currently in the process of getting through, and the 707 refers to the 707 part of 5707, which was the years since the creation of the universe. All makes sense? This is all done for very good reasons, trust me. We're not doing any of this for the convenience of our narrative. No, definitely not.
Could have been 4707 or 5707
or 6707 or 7707 or 8707 even, 9707 or 95707. I mean, hey, it could still mean that, right?
October 1946, when the 10 Nazi criminals were executed, was the exact year 5707, or in Hebrew, Tafshin Zion, the exact same letters and numbers. The 10 remaining Nazis fulfill the request of Esther that tomorrow let Haman's 10 sons be hanged. These were 10 Nazis, sons of Haman, also known as Hitler.
Wait, they hanged Hitler's sons? I hadn't heard that before. Well, no, of course they didn't, and of course you're assigning the label of Haman to Hitler for no real reason. Haman was an aggressor against the Jews, and Hitler was also an aggressor against the Jews, although Haman never actually succeeded in any of it. But either way, the author thought it was a good way to tie up the story by calling Hitler Haman, and his Nazi leaders who did not either die by suicide or get sentenced in absentia being called Hitler's sons for some reason. As you say, they were putting some spin on the events.
Furthermore, since the trial was conducted by a military tribunal, the sentence handed down should have been death by firing squad or by an electric chair as practiced in America.
Why? The executions were carried out by the Americans, and the Americans were hanging people all through World War II. Check out this list. Yeah, hanging was real unusual.
However, the court specifically prescribed hanging exactly as per Esther's request.
That's not why they prescribed hanging, though, is it? It wasn't like, well, Esther would have wanted it this way, so let's do that.
The New York Herald Tribune of October 16th, 1946 reported, with burning hatred in his eyes, Julius Streicher, one of the Nuremberg 10, looked down at the witness and shouted as he was about to be hung, Purim Fest, 1946.
Yeah, Streicher used Purim as propaganda a lot, so did Hitler. They both mentioned it in speeches. The newspaper that Streicher edited had an article about Purim and the violence of the Jews. They used it to paint the Jews as bloodthirsty murderers, which I think it's fair to assume is what he was doing again before he was hanged.
Now that cannot be random.
It's not random. If you look for patterns like this, you're gonna find them. Doesn't matter what book you're looking at, doesn't matter what religion you're coming at it from. You're gonna manage it at some point in some way, especially if you're willing to fudge numbers, which clearly the people who came up with this were. And I know that you can because people from all kinds of different belief systems do it all the time. And they all insist that it's impossible unless they're right.
Proof 22, the moon. Our moon is the perfect size and distance from the Earth for its gravitational pull. The moon creates important ocean tides and movements, so ocean waters do not stagnate.
Stagnate? Why would the ocean water stagnate without the moon? We still have a water cycle, we'd still have wind, we'd still have currents, we still have the sun, we still have the heat of the earth. The oceans are not going to stagnate. At least I really doubt that it would happen just from a change in the tides. I would have to be convinced of that.
And yet our massive oceans are restrained from spilling across the continents. Just think how a difference of a few miles would cause those rivers to overflow and destroy all of humanity.
I'm sorry, what? If the moon were a few miles closer to the Earth, the rivers would overflow and destroy all of humanity. What rivers? What rivers have enough water to do that? What oceans have enough water to do that? What are you talking about? Do you have any idea how high most parts of most continents are above sea level? As it is, with the moon in the position it is, the largest tidal ranges in the world, meaning the difference between low tide and high tide, are around 50 feet. And meanwhile, I'm sitting here at 2,200 feet above sea level. But your proposal is that the moon being a few miles closer would lead to complete devastation of the entire human species, including me here right now. Well, I have some news for you. Between the moon's nearest and furthest distances from us during its orbit, the moon's distance from the Earth varies by like 30,000 miles. That's more than 10% of its distance from the Earth, even at its furthest point. But a few miles would be apocalyptic. Okay.
That didn't just evolve that way. And the Big Bang doesn't have the kind of intelligence to get that one exactly right. Something created that with a purpose and precision, and some might call that God.
The current thought is that the moon used to be much closer to the Earth than it is now, and that it's moved further away over time. Would the moon being, say, half as far from the Earth as it is now affect us disastrously? No, we'd probably adapt. I mean, there would be tidal disasters in some places, but the species would survive. But the more important point is, we've adapted to a world where the moon is as far away from the Earth as the moon is. If the moon's distance is so critical to our survival, which I deeply question, then the answer to why we see it being the distance away that it is not because it was placed as far away as it is for us. It's because we adapted to it being as far away as it is. It's kind of an even less impressive version of the physical constants argument, where the reason that we see things being the way it is not because it was put that way for us. It's because we are the way we are for it. It's just a complete mistake in causal direction.
Next, proof 23, the human brain simultaneously processes an amazing amount of information. Your brain takes in all the colors and objects you see, the temperatures around you, the pressure of your feet against the floor, the sounds around you, the dryness of your mouth, even the texture of your keyboard.
I feel like you're coming up with these examples on the fly from your own personal experience right now. Am I wrong?
Your brain holds and processes all your emotions, thoughts, and memories. At the same time, your brain keeps track of the ongoing functions of your body, like your breathing pattern, eyelid movement, hunger, and movement of the muscles in your hands. The human brain processes more than 1 million messages a second. Your brain weighs the importance of all this data, filtering out the relatively unimportant.
Huh? Sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
This screening function is what allows you to focus and operate effectively in your world. The brain functions differently than other organs. There is an intelligence to it, the ability to reason, to produce feelings, to dream and plan and take action and relate to other people.
I think that's the end of the description of the brain. So basically, that was the longest possible way to say the brain does a lot of stuff. And now the question's going to be, I guarantee, that sounds complicated. How could that possibly happen? Therefore, God.
How many quadrillion years would it take for something that complex to evolve?
1/250,000th of 1 quadrillion years, I guess. Weird unit to use, kind of oversized for the application. But anyway, shock and amazement. Here we have someone who doesn't understand the sheer non-random power of natural selection and thinks evolution just means, it popped into existence randomly in 1972 or whatever. So this guy doesn't even give a shit enough to figure out even the most basic fundamentals of the thing he's arguing against. Makes it feel incredibly pointless, doesn't it?
It's ludicrous to think that the brain was created without intention.
Yes, I'm aware of your incredulity on this matter. Can we please move along here?
The creator of the brain must have been pretty great. Some might call that God.
Yeah, I call everyone I think is pretty great God. They usually don't think I'm pretty great. They usually think I'm kind of weird.
Proof 24 is short. Nothing creates nothing.
Didn't you already have that one more than one time? Am I going nuts here? Am I remembering things that never happened, or?
Only something can create something.
Yeah, I could swear you've had this one before. It really would not have been hard to tighten this list up, even into like a top 10.
That means something was there that preceded the universe. Some might call that God.
Oh, I thought something wasn't allowed as the answer to what preceded the universe. Apparently now it is. And whatever it is just automatically God.
And finally, proof number 25.
The longest one.
The Bible's predictions are true.
Again, didn't we already do one of these? Why didn't you just roll that into this one?
If a book accurately and repeatedly predicts the future, it can safely be said that something special is going on. Perhaps even something supernatural.
I really like your phrasing there. If a book repeatedly and accurately predicts the future, it can be said that something special is going on, perhaps even something supernatural. It's a very restrained and realistic way to say what you're trying to say. I wish you would approach everything that way.
And there are so many prophecies in the scriptures that it should be easy to take a look and decide if the Bible is supernatural.
Yeah, and I have to say I've not had good luck with the prophecies so far. I've looked at a lot of different ones that people have said to me prove for sure that the Bible's supernatural, and, well, let's say I'm not convinced. If you want an example, well, we just had one earlier with the Code of Esther, and now all I'm convinced of is that you really desperately want the Bible to be supernatural, and you'll pretty much accept anything, no matter how uncompelling, that you think could be taken to point in that direction. And that's pretty much the takeaway I've had from every other Bible prophecy that I've looked at.
As it turns out, the Bible, the book which attests to God's existence, is full of fulfilled prophecy.
Yeah, have you heard from the Christians how much stuff in the Old Testament proves Jesus is the Messiah?
You can read the first such prophecy in Jeremiah 25, 11 through 12. This prophecy was written sometime from 626 to about 586 BC, and it was not fulfilled until about 609 to 539, approximately 50 years later, depending on your calculation.
I'm already going cross-eyed, but I'm with you.
It says, this whole country will become a desolate wasteland, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. But when the 70 years are fulfilled, I will punish the king of Babylon and his nation, the land of the Babylonians, for their guilt, declares the Lord, and I will make it desolate forever.
Well, that didn't happen. The Neo-Babylonian Empire did not turn the lands into a desolate wasteland, however the ruled people might have felt about it. And after the fall of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, after being conquered by the Persians, the land of the Babylonians was not made desolate forever, or indeed at all.
In this passage of Scripture, Jeremiah said that the Jews would suffer 70 years of Babylonian domination, and that after this was over, Babylon would be punished. Both parts of this prophecy were fulfilled. In 609 BC, Babylon captured the last Assyrian king and took over the holdings of the Assyrian Empire, which included the land of Israel. Babylon then began to flex its muscles by taking many Jews as captives to Babylon and by destroying Jerusalem and the temple. This domination of the Jews ended in 539 BC when Cyrus, a leader of Persians and Medes.
It's really hard to listen to you stumble through reading somebody else's writing word for word and pretend that it's you saying it. It's just so tedious. Unfortunately, I kind of have to do it, and so do the viewers, because I have to actually let you get your point across. Or rather, whoever's point you're ripping off.
Conquered Babylon, bringing an end to the empire. The prophecy also had another fulfillment. The Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem's temple in 586 BC, but the Jews rebuilt it and consecrated it 70 years later in 516 BC. Restoring the temple showed in a very important way that the effects of the Babylonian domination had indeed come to an end.
Okay, I have to be clear on this point. What you read, the prophecy that you read, said nothing about the temple being destroyed or rebuilt. It was about the land being a desolate wasteland. But as I say, I find that part pretty believable to have been written after the rise of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, because it doesn't have to be a literal statement. This is something written by people affected by this event. And I feel like that could easily be emotional language more than purely realistic. The temple might even have something to do with that. So I'm not entirely discounting that, I'm just saying you read a quote, and it doesn't say what you're saying it says. So it's a bit unclear to me whether this was written during or a little bit after the reign of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. I'm sure someone who spends a lot more time looking into this stuff than I do and has a lot more interest in it could go much deeper than I intend to or want to here. But I have some real problems with this either way, just from the text of Jeremiah itself. I mean, I would expect, if this is coming from God, essentially perfect accuracy, but we have nothing of the sort. We're talking about Jeremiah 25. I'm going to skip forward to Jeremiah 50, that discusses what fate will befall Babylon. So it says, "A nation from the north will attack her and lay waste her land. No one will live in it. Both people and animals will flee away." Now, it's a bit unclear to me. Some sources say that Babylon was captured peacefully with no battle. Others say it was besieged. Either way, it definitely was not utterly destroyed. And it seems as though Cyrus made some kind of an effort to gain the loyalty of the people, for example, by invoking in the Cyrus cylinder the Babylonian god Marduk, who Jeremiah says will be filled with terror, and declaring how much he'd improved the lives of the people in the region. Now, definitely there's a strong whiff of propaganda to this. Cyrus or somebody associated with Cyrus trying to big him up to get the people on his side for reasons which are obvious and pragmatic when it comes to running a huge empire, which at this point it was. But really the point is this takeover was nothing like the absolute destruction prophesized. It says she will be the least of nations, a wilderness, a dry land, a desert. Because of the Lord's anger she will not be inhabited, but will be completely desolate. All who pass Babylon will be appalled. They will scoff because of all her wounds. Again, no, not even close. Shout against her on every side. She surrenders, her towers fall, her walls are torn down. The funny thing is the Cyrus cylinder actually talks about him trying to strengthen the defenses of one of the walls of Babylon. Now, I'm not sure if that's true, maybe it's propaganda, who knows, but it's kind of ironically opposed to the assertion in Jeremiah. It says, "Israel is a scattered flock that lions have chased away. The first to devour them was the king of Assyria. The last to crush their bones was Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Well, the last king of Babylon prior to it being captured by Cyrus was not Nebuchadnezzar, it was Nabonidus, who was not even a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar or apparently any other Babylonian king, but someone called Nabu-balatsu-ikbi. And Nabonidus had not just taken over, he ruled from 556 until the conquest in 539. That's a pretty good run, and since he was king for a pretty significant chunk of time at the end, and the final chunk of the 70-year oppression, you'd think he would have been mentioned as the last to crush their bones, but nope. So desert creatures and hyenas will live there, and there the owl will dwell. It will never again be inhabited or lived in from generation to generation. Well, that could not possibly be more wrong. I mean, if anything, Babylon thrived as one of the capitals of the Achaemenid Empire. And it just goes on and on like this through Jeremiah 50 and 51. Inaccurate assertion after inaccurate assertion, revenge fantasy after revenge fantasy, and similar claims also show up in Isaiah 13 and 14. How can you declare the Bible prophetically correct just because it happens to give a number of 70 years, but ignore all the actual meat of the prophecy, which is basically entirely wrong?
And then in Isaiah 45:1, written perhaps between 701 and 6681 BC.
An assertion that seems pretty dubious to me. And again, this is something that somebody who spends a lot more time on this Bible stuff can probably talk about a lot better than I can, but just reading through it, I have to say it seems very hard not to agree with the biblical scholars who say that there were multiple different authors of Isaiah at different times. I'll expand on that a little in a second.
You will find a prophecy that was ultimately fulfilled hundreds of years later in 539 BC. This is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of to subdue nations before him and to strip kings of their armor, to open doors before him so that gates will not be shut. That's what the verse says in Isaiah 45:1.
Yeah, so there's this idea that the first 39 chapters of Isaiah were written around the time frame that he mentions, around 700 BC. And then starting with chapter 40, we're on to a different author 150 years later or more, after Cyrus conquered Babylon. Argue in the comments, I guess, but it's really hard for me not to take that seriously because starting at chapter 40, the whole style shifts, but more importantly, the tone shifts a lot. Before that, it's all vengefulness and frustration and rage, clearly talking about a situation that's ongoing. And at chapter 40, we suddenly get this sense of relief, talking about the situation as if it's already passed. And in chapter 45, Cyrus himself is named explicitly and praised as anointed by God, even though he doesn't believe in the God of the Jews, and it said that God gave him his path to victory. It would seem bizarre to me to assume that that's not just written later. To believe that would require me to make a whole lot more assumptions. It's far simpler to just assume, yeah, that's a later piece.
In this passage, the prophet says God would open the gates of Babylon for Cyrus and his attacking army, despite Babylon's remarkable defenses, which include moats and walls that were more 70 feet thick and 300 feet high, with 250 watchtowers. Cyrus was able to enter the city and conquer it.
Okay, that stuff about the walls comes straight out of Herodotus, and I think that might be what I like to call an exaggeration. Either way, it's not really relevant to the prophecy.
Cyrus and his troops accomplished it by diverting the flow of the Euphrates River into a large lake basin. Cyrus was then able to march his army across the riverbed and into the city.
That's again Herodotus. Who knows? Doesn't really matter. Cyrus conquered Babylon. We get it.
Then Babylon's kingdom will be permanently overthrown. In Isaiah 13:19, there exists yet another prophecy that was not fulfilled until 539 BC. It says, Babylon, the jewel of kingdoms, the glory of the Babylon's pride, will be overthrown by God like Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah, and this is in the earlier parts of Isaiah, and that's kind of what I mean about the revenge fantasies. But this is from Isaiah 13, which I just mentioned a while ago when I was talking about Jeremiah 50 and 51, because it contains the same sort of total destruction inaccuracies as Jeremiah 50 and 51. That is, it's clearly a revenge fantasy about the entire place being wiped out and destroyed utterly forever, which is not anything like what actually happened.
Here, Isaiah tells us that Babylon would be overthrown permanently. History confirms the fact.
And what facts does it not confirm? Let's not cherry pick here.
That following Cyrus's destruction of Babylon in 539 BC, it never again rose to power as an empire.
Never again rose to power as an empire, okay, but what it says is she will never be inhabited or lived in through all generations. There no nomads will pitch their tents, there no shepherds will rest their flocks, but desert creatures will lie there, jackals will fill her houses. There the owls will dwell, and there the wild goats will leap about. Hyenas will inhabit her strongholds, jackals her luxurious palaces. Yeah, what actually happened was Cyrus took the city and turned it into one of his capitals. So wrong on basically all counts except for the fact that Babylon was conquered. If you want more inaccuracies, read the rest of Isaiah 13 and Isaiah 14. You have to really read between the lines to make this a perfectly accurate prophecy, by which I mean you have to ignore most of the lines and interpret the rest of them as saying something they don't say.
You've got to remember, however, that before the time of Cyrus, Babylon had been defeated by the Assyrian Empire as well, but Babylon was able to recover and later conquer the Assyrian Empire.
Yeah, I mean, there was no guarantee that Babylon would be a desolate desert/swampland forever, but the author was pissed. What do you want? He was willing to gamble on being proved wrong. He just wanted to express himself.
In light of this reality, I'm sure many people doubted Isaiah when he proclaimed this prophecy.
Maybe, and apparently they were very wise to.
In spite of this, and just as Isaiah predicted, the Babylonian Empire was defeated.
No, it was not defeated remotely as Isaiah predicted.
Never recovered from Cyrus's conquest. And there are many, many other biblical prophecies fulfilled. Just Google it and you can find it yourself.
Sure thing. I'll make sure to do that.
These are the 25 proofs. There could have been more.
Let's start with there could have been 25, but for some reason you just couldn't resist repeating yourself.
I hope this bolstered your faith in God. And I hope it wipes out any remnants of atheism that there may be on the internet.
Are you prophesizing that making one YouTube video is going to wipe out all atheism online? See, that prophecy would be impressive. If every atheist on the internet becomes a theist as a result of your video, then I think I might have to take you a bit more seriously.
I hope this stops it once and for all.
Good luck. So thank you all for watching. If you would be so kind, please do give the video a like and click subscribe if you haven't. If you really like the channel, please do consider supporting. Even just a couple bucks a month goes a long way. And huge thanks to every one of my supporters who's already made that decision. For early access, sign up to the email list at list.logicked.com, and I'll see you next time.